Hello, everybody. It's Michelle Starr bringing you Mysti-Stories. And today is Father's Day. And I just want to offer a little gift for any fathers that might be looking at this video. So I'm just going to go right for it, okay? This is for a Happy Father's Day 2020. All right. Maybe that relaxes you a little bit. I hope so. Um, Today's stories are about following the crumbs, great synchronicity. First, I have a shorter story and then another one that is quite long. Not that it's going to take a lot of time, but it's just a longer segment. But um, it will show you how mysticism can bring success. So just think about that while I tell you another story. This one, I have to laugh. It's just so funny. In the 90s, I think the mid 90s, I was working downtown Cleveland and I was starting a new job in a law office. I was a legal assistant and I went to work that first day for orientation. The human resources people showed me around. They took me through most of the orientation, but they had a woman there. I think she was about 40, but she looked much younger. She had long hair. She'd been with the firm for 20 years, so they honored her by letting her give some of the orientation to new legal assistants when they came in. So she came for me and took me into a small conference room, and I sat there, and she was rather gruff, but I thought, okay, it's just her personality. It's no problem for me. So I listened to her, and she's talking about legal things that we would be doing, which I had already, I think, 15 years experience. So it wasn't my first time working in a law firm, but she um she was kind of haughty, and I thought, okay, that's just the way she is. It's no skin off my nose. Um and she was saying about this duty and that part of the job and going over a few things, and then she says, well, you know the drill. It's like, oh, okay. And right about then, I saw out of the corner of my eye from the right a stream of light. It looked like liquid light. And she goes, "Oh, what did you just do to me? Something went into my eye." And I didn't know, but she had contacts in, and I was just sitting there. I didn't do anything. But she was so bothered by whatever this was that went into her eye, she had to get up and go to the ladies' room to clear it out. So, okay, I just sit and wait. So I waited there, calm. Yoga really helps with that, in case you hadn't noticed. And she said, "Well, after that, I'm never going to mess with you." As I don't know where that was all coming from, but I had to laugh because, at least in part, because she was being so, I don't even know what you would call it, just haughty and holier than thou. Um, and I didn't, I wasn't bothered by it. But what that was, that stream of light, was a totem animal. Now, totem animals or power animals are the spirit of animals that work with us. Okay, I'm on the mystic path. I see visions. What can I say? I have totem animals. So it just so happens that this was skunk. And skunk represents the spirit of self-esteem, personal power, speaking your truth. And the skunk does not have to be aggressive. It does not have to battle anybody, because even the animals know, as well as humans, that when a skunk is threatened, it turns around and points its tail at you, lifts its tail, and squirts. That's what this was. Skunk had squirted light into this young woman's eye. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to protect myself. I didn't have to object. I wasn't bothered by it in the first place. I observed it and I noticed her behavior, but everybody's different. So I just had to laugh because this just came out of nowhere. And if I hadn't been as aware as I was, I wouldn't have seen that stream of light go past me and into her eye. But for her to say, "What did you do to me?" I was amazed by that, because I didn't do it, but my friend did. So I'm going to tell you more about totem animals a little bit after my next story, but I want to finish this one. This young woman, as I mentioned, had been in this law office for 20 years. So she knew all the ins and outs of the office, but she had been living with her man friend for 10 years, and he left her. He just dumped her, and it threw her off and out of balance so badly that she had a nervous breakdown. So I was glad I didn't react to her, because there was a day when I would have felt, with low self-esteem, I would have been intimidated by her, but I was not. And I felt compassion for her, because that's pretty tough to lose your loved one. And then I guess she had another incident around this issue with this man friend, and she was on the verge of another breakdown, and she took time off the first time around. They let her take time to regroup and recover from this event. But the second time, they didn't want to let her um, take time off for it. So I think she was just sad and reacting. And after that, she was always nice to me. She never did mess with me. So if you ever meet me on the street, you'll know not to mess with me because I have skunk next to me and protecting me. So so that's the first story. The second story started back in the year 2000. I was teaching yoga, and the Cleveland Clinic had put out a notice that they wanted a yoga teacher to come and lead the classes, the yoga classes, for a scientific study. It was entitled The Impact of Yoga on a Chronic Pain Population. So they designed this study, and it was for 3 months, and the students, the participants, would come 3 times a week for 3 months. There was a psychiatrist that was in charge. She was a resident at the clinic at that time, a psychiatric resident, and she was the lead for that study. Although there was a doctor that overseed her because she was just passing through with her residency. But I was selected for this position to teach these classes, which I was just thrilled. Um, it was downtown. It was quite a bit of it was during the winter, but it was very rewarding. The people that came, everybody had some sort of pain, so it was very rewarding to watch them progress and learn how to release stress and to handle their bodies around the pain management. And it demonstrated how yoga can be used as a therapeutic tool for a range of physical challenges, for emotional challenges. The conclusion of the study revealed that yoga improves mood in chronic pain patients, leads to decreased medication use, and a decrease in pain severity. Results are statistically significant. So these classes were gentle yoga, and what I noticed most was these people just needed to love. They needed to love themselves and take care of themselves. So at that time, after the study was complete, there was an open house for all the residents. That was this doctor's theme, her scientific study. There were many doctors, many residents that had their own, so they had an open house, a reception for all of these doctors, and I went. And the psychiatrist told me that she would let them know, and I would be able to teach yoga at the Cleveland Clinic, which was a dream of mine. So when I saw her at the open house at the reception, they had a 4 foot by 5 or 6 feet poster. It was plastic, but it showed all of the testing and the results of the study. And we were standing there talking, and she says, "Well, I'm going to be leaving in the morning. I'm going to California for another residency, working with autistic children." So that was it. I had no support for having this job teaching for the Cleveland Clinic. It's a difficult, at least at that time, was difficult to get into. What they actually did was they had somebody in pain management just kind of look up yoga, and she taught. So here I had 30 years of experience already, but anyway, I was really disappointed that I wasn't going to be able to teach. And I was confused too, because I felt guided, and I felt that it was like in the cards, so to speak, but apparently not. So a few years later, in 2008, so 8 years later, I was teaching. I traveled around, and um, I did have my own yoga center, but that started in 2010 and just went for a few years. Uh, but in 2008, I was teaching down in Loudonville, which is near Mohican State Park. And I love that town. It's so beautiful there. And Mohican is my favorite place in the world. It's just so natural. And there's the gorge there. So I used to visit frequently. And I eventually moved there in 2002. So I lived there. I started yoga classes at the library. I had a third floor apartment that was just awesome. Had large rooms and a spiral staircase that went up into a loft. And I could look out the windows over the whole town, and there it was hilly out there. So it's just beautiful. I loved it. And so I was teaching there at the library, and it was the new moon in July, I think, of 2008. And I think it was a Wednesday night. And I had a good class going there. We had a great time. And I led the yoga class. We went through our poses and breathing and so forth. And then at the end, there's Shavasana, which I mentioned before, is the relaxation at the end of the practice. And it's usually 10 to 15, at the very most 20 minutes. That's pretty rare, especially nowadays. But I was guided during that Shavasana to take the students on a guided visualization. So, being the dark of the moon, I guided them outdoors, and we went to the dark woods. Okay, let's see, where else did we go? Anyway, we went up a hill, and there was a cave there. So now each person is doing their own guided visualization. I'm just guiding them. So each person is having this experience on their own, including myself. So I went into the cave, and it was cool, and my eyes had to adjust, even though it was dark outside because it was the dark of the moon, just like it is today. So there was no sliver of moon for light. And so it was very difficult to see, but my eyes did adjust somewhat to the darkness of the cave. I could feel the coolness and a little moisture in there. And then I heard breathing, and I wasn't afraid. I just heard breathing. And then I could see there was a black panther, a panther lady. Um, and we kind of startled each other. So I held my hand out for her to sniff, which I do with cats or dogs anyway, just so they don't feel threatened. So she sniffed my hand, and then she head bumped me and started rubbing up against me, and I petted her, and just like a cat, only it was a big one. She was beautiful and black and sleek, and you could feel the sinewy muscles in her. Um, so I'm petting her, and then she starts to walk into the cave further away from me. And she stopped and she turned around and looked at me as though, well, are you coming? So it's like, all right. So I started following her, and she took me kind of through some curves and twists and um, through the cave, and we came to a clearing, an opening, and over, it would be to my left, but over in a corner of the cave was her den. And she took me there, and she had two cubs. And she let me play with the cubs. And it was great because they were adorable. Just more Black Panther power. So I played with them for a while. I rolled around with them, and um, they were just very playful and calm. And then intuitively, I knew it was time for me to go, and we both stood up at the same time because we were just connected. So I stood up, and she walked with me to the entrance to the cave, and then I left her, and she went back into her den, and I went back through down the hill, um, through the woods, and then back into my body, into the present, um, after the visualization. So everybody that was in the class was surprised. They'd never had that kind of experience before. One woman was a little afraid because she didn't know you could have that kind of experience. It was kind of like a shamanic journey, actually. I didn't plan it, I just was guided to do it. And it was the new moon. The new moon, the dark of the moon, is a little more conducive to meditation and silence. Um, it's just quieter. So it was a pretty amazing experience. So we were talking about it the following week because following the crumbs, all right? So at this point, I was not living in Loudonville. I had moved away towards my hometown, which is just a small town, but it was like an hour and 15 minutes away. But when I did live there and I had the yoga classes at the library, I loved these people so much that I was willing to drive to be with them. and it gave me some extra money, and we just had a great time. It was a nice big room. We had plenty of space and lots of people that came. So the following week, I was driving down um, towards Loudonville, and right around Ashland area, there's a curve in the road. It's not quite a hairpin curve, but it's quite a sharp curve. But as the road comes down, and it's well marked, I mean, they've got flashing lights and everything, so it's a noticeable curve. But as you come around this curve, there's that road also goes straight ahead. So as I was coming down towards that curve, I could see a truck, a pickup truck with an RV attached to it. So it was coming towards me, and he turned to go the same direction I was going. So I was going to go around the curve. He was coming out, and he actually made a left turn. So he's pulling this RV, and on the side of the RV is a black panther with her two cubs. So I was blown away. Uh, Synchronicity is fun that way. So I went to class and I told everybody about seeing the panther with her cubs on the RV. It's like when things like that happen, you pay attention. So what's going on? What's the universe trying to tell me? Um, just watch and see where you're guided, because it's like breadcrumbs. So um, after that, I was seeing there are semi trucks with their big trailers on the back, and I was seeing the ones where they had two panthers facing each other, you know, growling and kind of on their back legs, and it was just more synchronicity. So I was seeing those a lot, which I don't see them anymore. But um, I I was back home this in a couple days, and I was talking on the phone with a friend who actually works for the Cleveland Clinic. She works in one of the smaller hospitals, not downtown. And we were talking, and I says, "Yeah, I'm looking for more places to teach yoga. So if you know of any, please let me know." And she says, "Well, I know the woman here who hires for teachers, hires teachers for, you know, teaching jobs for fitness and yoga." So she gave me the woman's name and number, and I called her, and she says, "Oh, no, I don't do the hiring for that, but I can tell you who does." So actually, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Um, I was looking for a place to teach, and I saw it on the computer. There was a place 5 minutes from my home, and it's a new place that was opening up, a high-end fitness facility, and they needed a yoga teacher. So I went, I think it was on a Wednesday night, because normally I would teach on Wednesday, but this Wednesday something happened where I didn't have to teach that night. So I called them and made an appointment. I went and interviewed with the manager, and he hired me on the spot because I already had a lot of experience, and um, I just fit the bill for them. So it just so happened that night they had a class for CPR, and they required their employees to have certification in CPR. So I had had certification before. I'd gone through the courses how many times, but I didn't have an, an active certification. So he invited me to come. It was in another town, maybe half an hour away, but it was at a fire station and it was where everybody could meet, and they taught the class there. And while I was there, the manager was there and some of the other employees that were getting certified. And I felt a little shy because I didn't know anybody. And so I sat in the back of the room and he says, "Hey, Michelle, come up and sit with us. Come up front." So I sat next to him and he was wearing baggy shorts and they were, mm, I think they were like just below the knee if he were standing up. But he was sitting down and I just happened to look over and I looked at his leg and he had a tattoo on his right outer calf. And again, I was blown away. You may have guessed it. It was the head of a panther, a black panther. So it's like, okay, here's another crumb. So this is meant to be. But I wasn't too sure about it because they wanted us to wear these skimpy, strappy outfits because it was high end. And I don't know how old was I in 2008? Um, so and it was very cold. They had the air conditioning up really high, and I was a freeze baby. So we worked it out. They had some other shirts because they had their logo on these shirts, and they paid for all that. So um, we found something that I could stay warm in. So um, I had the certification, and then they also wanted me to have liability insurance, which I did not have. So I had to get liability insurance, which it wasn't all that expensive or anything. It's just going through the motions and getting it to meet their requirements. So I got the liability insurance and I taught there for a little while. And then there was an uncomfortable incident there with one of the other ladies, and she told me about it, and I thought, do I really want to be teaching here? It was just maybe a few weeks, maybe a couple months at the very most. So um, now I was talking to my friend that worked for the Cleveland Clinic and explaining to her that I was still looking for more yoga teaching opportunities. And that's when she gave me this woman's name and she said, "Oh no, I don't hire for this, but I can give you the name and number of the woman who does." So I called that lady and she worked in the downtown fitness center, huge fitness center there. And she said, "Well, just send me your material. We may be needing somebody, but I don't have it planned just yet." So it's like, okay. So I both sent it to her in an email, and I also had to go online and fill out their application, which took forever. It was pages and pages. But it's like, okay, it's what you have to do if you want to get the job. So um, I heard from her the next day, and she said, "Can you come down for an interview?" And I said, "Sure." So she had me come down like within a couple of days. So I went and interviewed with her. She was so funny. Um, she was talking about her husband, who was, she called him her second child because apparently he was acting childish and she was really funny, tongue in cheek. Um, I don't think she even meant to be funny, but to me it was hilarious. So I had to do an audition for her to prove to her that I knew yoga and could teach it. And she says, "Well, I'll get in touch with you." So then it was the next day that she called me and she said, "Can you start with I think it was like a couple classes a week?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And this was just as PRN, which is as needed. So it's like, okay, it's better than nothing. It's my foot in the door, right? So within a week or two, they hired me as an actual employee, which was really good. Um, it was more secure and that way I had a schedule that I was on and it didn't change unless I needed to change it. So all of this with the Black Panther, the visualization, the RV with a mother and her cubs on the side of it, the fellow's tattoo, and seeing the trucks with their trailers with the two Black Panthers on them. Um, it just led me right to that job. And as I look back in 2000, after that study was done and the psychiatrist was leaving for California for another residency, I just figured it out. I wasn't ready, or the clinic wasn't ready. Just wasn't time yet. So it took 8 years, but I taught there for, I taught the employees, so doctors, nurses, staff, for 5 years, and I loved it. And during that time, I had my yoga center. And so I was teaching like 18 classes a week. And I was already like 65. So, but if anything, um, if it had been anything other than yoga, I couldn't have done that kind of work because I was working probably 15 hours a day. Um, Not the yogic lifestyle, but it was just a few years. It was so expensive there, and so when the lease was up, I left the center. But it was a great experience, and I made awesome contacts through all of that. So let's see, did I have, yeah, I have one more story for you, and it's not very long. Um, when, let's see, it was about the mid to late 1980s. I was with my roommate. We had gone to a small mall, shopping mall, and we were in the bookstore, and we were in there for a couple of hours just browsing. And so when you're focused like that for that long a time, you're in altered state. If you're prone to that, if you work with it, you're in altered state. So we decided to come out of the bookstore. It was a Walden Books back when they had Walden Books. Um, and I eat books, so uh, I used to spend a lot of time in the bookstores before I started ordering online more. But so it was time to go. We walked out of the bookstore, and I just had an impression. I could feel it physically on the right side of my head, like a pressure. And at that moment, I was thinking I should change my name to Michelle Starr. Now, a little background, my maiden name, my birth name was Dumpke. And all through school, I already had low self-esteem, but even my friends would make fun of me because of my last name. One used to say, hey donkey, come here." Oh, I just hated it. So then when I had my own business, people would say, and what is your name? And I would tell them, and they'd say, what? How do you spell that? So um, that was some of the background, but this was an actual like direction, like an instruction to change my name to Michelle Starr. And at that moment, I heard being paged over the loudspeaker in the walkway of the mall, paging Michelle Starr, Michelle Starr. I was blown away. So a few years later, in 1991, I did change my name to Michelle Starr. So it's legal, and it's been great. It felt kind of strange for a while because stars are kind of big, and it's kind of like wearing the name was kind of weird, but it was okay. I grew into it, and I try to shine as much as I can, right? So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about totem animals in case you want to check it out for yourself. By the way, the panther, um, now when you have a totem animal, and I'll show you how I know who my totem animals are. Now, when you have a meditation like that and an animal shows up, they're a guide. That's a given. They're there for a reason. They're either a protector or a spirit animal guide. Um, but when you have an animal come to you like that, and I explained this to the class too, because if it was happening to me and it was happening to all of them, then Panther was a guide for all of us, a totem animal, a power animal. And the Native American Indians work with them, and there are other people that work with them too, other um, um, belief systems. Okay. But I looked up Panther back then. This is dated 2016. This one's dated 2011. So um, I looked it up in a couple of different places. But I'll just read you a couple paragraphs of what this says to explain. Of all the panthers, probably the Black Panther has the greatest mysticism associated with it. So obviously I'm talking about being on the mystic path, so this is perfectly natural, all right? Um, it is the symbol of the feminine. So if you're aware of the masculine, feminine polarities, in yoga we learned the right side of the body is the masculine polarity because it's the mostly because most people are right-handed. So it's the active doing part, uh, the energy of the right side of the body. And then the left side is the feminine side, which is more receptive, listening, receiving. So it is a symbol of feminine energies manifest upon the earth. It is often a symbol of darkness. So I went on the new moon into this cave, which is dark, death, and rebirth from out of it. So death and rebirth, when they talk about it in connection with behavior and self-growth, self-improvement, death and rebirth is not about dying, like dead. It is about releasing an old way of perceiving or looking at things or doing things, belief systems that just no longer serve. So that is part of what Black Panther is about. So what was I giving up when I was looking for this job at the Cleveland Clinic? I gave up the disappointment and the impatience, me impatient. Um, yeah, that's something I've had to cultivate most of my life. But um, the death and rebirth is where you make a change. You give it up. You surrender to a higher side of yourself. So actually cultivating patience and um, letting go of old ways like low self-esteem, just starting to love yourself, recognize your own worth. And these are things that, you can go to a counselor, you can go to a church or whatever. I tried church, that did not work. I ended up getting molested by the head deacon of the church. So it's like, I'll go out to nature. Thank you, just the same. But giving up fears is part of it, death and rebirth. So it's like oh, I'm trying to think of the bird that dies and is reborn again out of its own ashes. The phoenix, sorry, the phoenix that dies and then is reborn. It's like that. Only um, well, here it is. There still exists in humanity a primitive fear of the dark and of death. So our whole society is kind of phobic around death. The Black Panther helps us to understand the dark and death and the inherent powers of them, and thus by acknowledging them, eliminate our fears and learn to use the powers. So the powers that come from getting comfortable with the dark is an ability to move through darkness. And darkness can be discouragement, depression. Um, as a matter of fact, years and years ago, in the 70s even, um, I was for a while I was married, and we had a partnership in an airplane, and we would schedule it. We would share, the schedule, and then sometimes we would go flying. We'd go on vacation, go out west, and so one time we had taken off. It was a Piper Cherokee. I think it was a four-seater. And we had taken off. We were flying, and there were all these clouds. They weren't storm clouds, but there were a lot of clouds, just really noticeable. And once we rose above these clouds, there was the sun just shining brightly. And I made a comment to my then husband, and I said, "Oh, the sun really does shine even when it's cloudy." Well, he just guffawed because he thought that was so funny, and I was so stupid to think that the sun didn't shine when it was cloudy. Well, I was living a metaphor right then. The cloudiness and the darkness was from my childhood and from my life and how bad I felt. I was suicidal by 23. I tried it and nothing happened. That's in my book. You can check that out if you want to. Um, but I was very low self-esteem, and um, it really was a dark childhood. So he just thought it was the funniest thing, and I was practically in tears because he was laughing at me. So a few years later, probably, let's see, that was in the 70s, so the mid to late 80s again, I was with my roommate, and he was an attorney, and by this time we had divorced. It just didn't last very long, and we had stopped by his office just to say hi. So while we were there, he started to tell my roommate about this story where I thought when it was cloudy, the sun didn't shine. That's how depressed I was at that time. And she didn't laugh either, but he laughed so hard, he had tears rolling down his cheeks. And I started to cry because I felt so humiliated. And I had a flashback to when I was in the airplane and he laughed at me the first time for thinking that the sun didn't shine when it was that cloudy. So that flashback happened for a reason, and I've had a few flashbacks, and I've had experiences where I was in touch with a parallel self, like when I was 13, 14. So these are awesome experiences that give us answers and give us support. But this flashback showed me how far I had come in that 10 or 12 years, however long that was. So I had worked through many issues around fear and low self-esteem. I still had a lot of work to do. I actually went through a 15-year initiation, a spiritual initiation. So that was the focus, was healing all of these um, past life experiences, memories, my childhood. Um, so that's what the mystic path is about, because once you clear all of those issues and you have your self-esteem, your sense of self intact, then you're truly clear of your karma and you can really make a difference in the world, however you're guided. So that's what I do now, is follow my guidance. All right. So I hope that's interesting for you. I love these stories. It's so fun to tell them to you. Now, I want to explain um, with the totem animals. I learned about them. I was doing tarot readings actually at a bar, but it was a upscale bar, and it was a new acquaintance of mine, and I was waiting. I was there early, so I was waiting for the time that I would start doing readings, when people would start coming in, which I think was like around 4 o'clock. So I had time, and she brought out this book and set of cards. It's called Medicine Cards, and it is by, well, it's the subtitle is The Discovery of Power Through the Ways of Animals. So that's really what you're doing. You're using the energy. Everybody has these. I mean, you may have a favorite animal or more than one. So if that's the case, then it's probably one of your animal guides or power animal. But it's by Jamie Sams and David Carson. There's a book, the medicine cards, and then the actual cards are in here. So the book gives an explanation and it shows you how to find your 9 totem animals. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 positions, and then there's your masculine and feminine selves. So she explains the significance of each, because they're in the 4 directions, and the above, the below, the right and the left side, which is your masculine, feminine. So it's all explained in here. So this was another book I ate. Let's see. Usually I write the date in here. Oh yeah, I bought this in August of 1995. So she explains the animal, and you put it in the position. So this is the original 1995 notes that I took, that I wrote down in her bar, because I didn't have much time. So I went into meditation and I prayed, okay, please show me the appropriate animals that I need to see that are my totems, so that I can learn. And when I see these animals out in the um, third dimension reality or illusion, whichever you want to call it, then I would understand what was happening. Now, Panther was not one of my animals on here. Okay. So that was an extra guide that was brought to me for empowerment, because Black Panther is the fiercest of all the cats. Now, in case you haven't noticed, I'm a pretty gentle soul. I talk kind of slow. I'm easygoing. Although I can be fast paced and I can yell really loud because my diaphragm is really strong from all the yoga, okay? And plus I majored in phys ed. So I've been athletic most of my life. So these cards really helped me to tune in and to learn about power, um, and what the animals mean, and just how I can work with them. So that's one book. Now, showing you that one, I want to show you another one which is related but not quite the same. This other one is also by Jamie Sams, and it's called The Sacred Path Cards. All right, so it's the same thing. It's a book with cards. I don't know how many there are, 44 cards. And this is many of the Native American spiritual traditions. She talks about many of them, not just one. And it's another consciousness book, and can help with healing and self-esteem. You can use the cards to just take a card and work with it. You can do a spread, you can do whatever you want. It's all in the book. But I learned so much and about the shamanic journey and the path of the shamanic person, the shaman or Sha woman. So these are still around. I've seen them on Amazon. So if they interest you, now Skunk is in here. And Skunk really came through for me. And so did Black Panther Lady. So I want to leave you with this thought. I think I mentioned a book to you, Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Um, this quotation is also by Joseph Campbell. So he says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." So anything you're afraid of, you need to go towards it. You, I. I'm not going to project onto you, but that's how we grow, is to face our fears. And I love caves anyway. I've always had a class in the basement, whether it was at the library or in my home. So I'm a cave dweller, I guess. But it's I don't have any earth in my chart, so this helps keep me grounded. So I hope you enjoyed my music, a little bit of Happy Father's Day, just calming, and these stories. So um, the next episode of Michelle's Mysti-Stories is going to be on major healing. Let's see, find my notes here. It's number 7, and it's going to be on, I got my pages mixed up here. Major healing meditations, visions, and dreams. So some of these are a little more on the serious side, healing fears. So this is where I actually go in and work with darkness, facing the dark. And so you can look forward to that. It's amazing stuff because it's just so classic. But so that's what we have next time. So I look forward to seeing you here. Thank you for watching and listening. And if you have any questions, I'll have my information in the description. Again, it's michellestaryoga.com. And if you'd like a tarot reading or numerology, contact me. If you'd like to do live yoga with me on Zoom, we're still doing Zoom yoga. We usually do yoga right in this room, but not yet. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me as well, and I can give you the link to our classes. All right? So have a wonderful evening or whatever it is, wherever you are. And thank you again. Namaste.